Most people don't end up with a life they regret because they made one big mistake. They regret the 1,000 tiny moments when they chose comfort over courage. Here's the problem. Your brain rewards you for choosing comfort. It rewards you for staying quiet, for not rocking the boat, for choosing what feels easier in the moment. But those micro decisions, they add up. And one day you look around and think, how did I end up here? In this video, I want to show you how to break that cycle so that you can avoid regret better than 99% of people, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's scary, especially then. And no, this is not about quitting your job tomorrow or blowing up your life. It's about something much sneakier and much more common. So let's dive in, starting with strategy number 1, which is to understand where regret actually comes from. Most people think regret comes from failure, from making the wrong choice, from trying something and it not working out. But that's not what actually eats at people long term. Regret comes from inaction, from the moments that you knew you wanted to speak up and didn't, from the idea that you kept postponing, the conversation that you avoided, the version of yourself that you kept telling yourself you'd get to later. What's interesting is that when researchers study regret over time, people don't regret the things that they tried and failed at nearly as much as the things that they never tried at all, especially when it comes to growth and identity and becoming who they knew they were capable of being. And that makes sense because failure hurts, but it's kind of a complete loop. You did something, you learned something, you moved. Inaction is different. Inaction just lingers. It turns into this quiet background noise in your life, a low-grade dissatisfaction that you can't quite explain. And here's what no one really tells you. Most of the time, inaction doesn't feel like fear. It feels like being reasonable, like being responsible, like waiting for better timing, like needing more clarity. Your brain says, let's not rush. Let's stay safe. Let's keep things comfortable. And in the moment, that feels smart. But over time, that's exactly how people drift into regret. Not because they made one terrible decision, but because they kept choosing comfort in small, perfectly justifiable ways. I've seen this in my own life. There were moments, especially earlier on, where I didn't regret the scary decisions that I made. I regretted how long I stayed in places that I had already outgrown. Not because I was lazy or because I didn't care, but because comfort felt responsible and growth felt reckless. And your brain is very clear about which one it prefers. Okay, now that we understand where regret actually comes from, let's move on to strategy number 2. And here's the mistake most people make. They think comfort is neutral. Like if they're not actively moving forward, at least they're not moving backward. But that's not how it works. Comfort isn't a pause button. It's a direction because every time you choose comfort, your brain learns something. It learns, oh, this is how we handle discomfort, by avoiding it. And the tricky part is your brain actually rewards you for that. When you don't send the email, when you don't speak up, when you stay quiet, when you stay put, your nervous system calms down. The anxiety drops and your brain goes, good job, that worked. But what it's really rewarding isn't wisdom, it's relief. And relief feels amazing in the short term, but it quietly trains you to shrink your life. I'll give you a very personal example. There was a long stretch of my life where, on paper, everything was fine. I was working as a physician and I was successful and respected and doing work that mattered. And there was no dramatic moment where I thought, I need to leave right now. What I felt instead was much quieter. There were these tiny moments like when I was driving home or filling out another form or having the same conversation for the 100th time, where I'd think, I don't think this is for me anymore. And immediately my brain would jump in. This is a good job. Don't be dramatic. Lots of people would love this life. You can't just walk away from something stable. And honestly, that voice sounded reasonable. Comfort wasn't screaming at me, it was soothing me. It said, stay, you're fine. Now's not the time. And every time I listened, I felt relief. Nothing bad happened, and the discomfort went away. So my brain learned, excellent strategy. Let's keep doing that. But here's what I didn't realize at the time. Every time I chose comfort, in those moments, I wasn't standing still. I was training myself to ignore my own instincts. I was practicing self-betrayal. And that's the dirty little secret here. Comfort doesn't just keep you safe, it conditions you. Now, I want to pause here just for a second to acknowledge that when I share my story, I know how it can land for some people. They think, well, sure, but you had a profession, you had options, you had a safety net. But here's the thing. This pattern has nothing to do with what you're starting with. It has everything to do with how comfort shows up in your life. Because comfort wears different costumes. For some people, comfort looks like prestige, a respected role, a stable career that you've outgrown, but one that you stay in because it feels responsible. For others, comfort looks like not risking embarrassment, not applying, not asking, not putting yourself out there because rejection would hurt too much. And for a lot of people, comfort looks like resignation, telling yourself, well, at least this pays the bills. At least I shouldn't complain. At least this is better than nothing. It sounds humble, it sounds realistic, and it sounds mature. But it does the same thing. It teaches your nervous system, don't reach, don't hope, don't move. So someone who looks and feels like they have nothing and are starting without any advantages can be making the exact same comfort-based choices as someone who looks like they have everything. Different circumstances, same conditioning. And 5 or 10 years later, the regret sounds eerily familiar. Not, I failed, but I never really tried. I kept talking myself out of it. I stayed where I was because it felt safer than wanting more. That's why this pattern exists no matter what your current circumstances are. Comfort doesn't care what form it takes. Its job is always the same, to keep you exactly where you are. That's why regret doesn't show up as a big explosion. It shows up as a quiet sense of, I didn't become who I thought I would. Not because you failed, but because you kept choosing relief over growth in moments that felt completely justifiable at the time. And that's exactly why comfort is not neutral. It's training. So to sum up, strategy number 2 is this. Recognize that comfort isn't neutral. Okay, so let's move on to strategy number 3. So here's the shift that most people never make. They think that regret comes from not having enough time or the right opportunity or better circumstances, but that's not actually what's going on. Regret isn't really about what you didn't do. It's about who you didn't become. Because what people regret isn't being busy, it's not being tired, it's not even making the wrong call now and then. What they regret is the gap between who they were living as and who they knew deep down they were capable of becoming. And that gap, that's an identity issue. So here's what I mean. Most people wait to act until they feel confident or motivated or certain. They tell themselves, I'll do it when I'm ready, when I feel more clear, when I'm less scared. But identity doesn't work that way. You don't act because you feel confident. You feel confident because you acted. Every small decision you make is a vote, not just for a result, but for the kind of person that you are becoming. When you speak up, you're not just sharing an idea, you're becoming someone who speaks. When you publish the thing, you're not just posting content, you're becoming someone who puts themselves out there. When you choose growth over comfort, even in a tiny way, you're reinforcing an identity that says, I don't abandon myself when things feel uncomfortable. That's why regret cuts so deeply, because it's not about the missed opportunity. It's about the version of you that never got practiced into existence. There's a classic idea going all the way back to Aristotle that who we are is shaped by what we repeatedly practice. And whether you know it or not, you're practicing something every day. You're practicing courage or avoidance. You're practicing self-trust or self-doubt. You're practicing growth or comfort. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't regret one big decision that they didn't make. They regret the pattern. The years of choosing what felt safe over what felt true. The moments where they outsourced their identity to fear and called it being practical. This is also why regret often shows up later in life, not because it's suddenly too late, but because that identity gap becomes harder to ignore. You start to feel it when the distractions quiet down. So this is strategy number 3. Recognizing that regret is an identity problem, not a time problem. But the good news is that identity is incredibly responsive. It doesn't require a dramatic overhaul. It changes through repetition, through small, deliberate acts of alignment, which is why the next shift is so powerful because it gives you a simple way to use regret before it happens. So let's go there now to strategy number 4. Now, once you see that regret is an identity issue, not a time issue, the question becomes, how do you actually use that knowledge? How do you make better decisions in the moment, especially when comfort is loud and persuasive? So here's a tool I use all the time. I call it the future regret test. And it's simple. When you're standing at a fork in the road, when one option feels easier and the other feels more honest, ask yourself this: which version of me will thank me for this? Not 10 years from now, not at the end of your life. Think smaller, 6 months, a year. Will future you feel relieved or quietly disappointed? That question cuts through a lot of the noise because future you doesn't really care about your excuses. They don't care that you were tired or busy or unsure. They care about whether you honored what you already knew. I use this constantly when I'm debating whether to have a conversation that I would rather avoid, or when I'm tempted to stay quiet instead of saying the thing that matters, or when I'm deciding whether to keep scrolling or start creating. So I used this exact question during my TEDx journey. When I was first selected, after the initial excitement wore off, a few doubts started creeping in. This was going to take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of focus. It would mean writing something meaningful and practicing it a lot, and putting myself on a very visible stage. And my brain immediately offered me some very reasonable reasons to say no. You're too busy for this. Is this really the right time? You can always do something like this later. Comfort was making a strong case. But when I ran it through the future regret test, the answer was obvious. I knew that if I turned away from this, future me would be disappointed. Not devastated, just quietly disappointed. And that feeling matters because I didn't say yes to TEDx because I felt ready. I said yes because I didn't want to become the kind of person who keeps declining opportunities that matter to her. That's the distinction. The future regret test doesn't ask, will this work? It asks, will I respect myself for this? Those are very different questions. Most growth decisions, they don't come with guarantees. The talk might land or it might not. The video might perform or it might flop. The conversation might go well or it might be really awkward. But avoiding regret doesn't require certainty. It requires alignment. And most of the time, you already know the answer. You just don't like it. Comfort says, let's not. Let's wait. Let's stay safe. Future you says something much quieter. Future you says, you already know what to do. So strategy number 4 is to use future regret as a compass. All right, now let's move on to the final strategy, number 5. And this is where most advice goes off the rails. It makes avoiding regret sound dramatic or exhausting, or like you need to completely reinvent your life overnight. You don't. You need one small daily act of courage. I call it an anti-comfort choice. Just one decision a day where you intentionally choose growth over relief. Not the biggest thing, not the scariest thing, just something that makes you think, I would normally avoid this. That's it. Because identity doesn't change through intensity. It changes through consistency. Think about it like this. You don't become courageous by making one heroic decision. You become courageous by practicing not backing away over and over again. Your anti-comfort choice could be saying the thing that you usually keep to yourself, turning off the show after just one episode, hitting publish instead of saving it as a draft, choosing the workout when the couch is calling your name, having the conversation that you have been rehearsing in your head for weeks. Nothing life-altering, just identity-altering. And here's the key rule. Your anti-comfort choice should feel slightly uncomfortable, but deeply aligned. This isn't about suffering. It's not about outsourcing your life to fear. Most people think that regret comes from doing the wrong thing, but more often regret comes from repeatedly not doing the right thing because it felt easier in the moment. And when you make just one anti-comfort choice per day, something really interesting happens. You start to trust yourself again. You start to see yourself as someone who follows through, someone who listens to that quiet nudge, someone who doesn't abandon themselves when things feel inconvenient. And when that identity starts to form, regret loses its power because regret thrives on patterns, not moments. You don't avoid regret by being fearless. You avoid regret by being deliberate, by choosing growth just often enough that your life starts to move in the direction that you actually care about. So strategy number 5 is this: make one daily anti-comfort choice. Now, if you zoom out with all 5 strategies that we talked about, here's the pattern. Regret doesn't come from one catastrophic mistake. It comes from the quiet accumulation of moments where you knew what mattered to you and you chose comfort instead. Not because you were weak, not because you didn't care, but because your brain rewarded relief and called it being reasonable. And the cost of that, it isn't immediate. It shows up later as a vague dissatisfaction, as a sense that you played it a little too safe, as the feeling that you didn't quite become who you were meant to be. The good news is you don't need a new personality or a dramatic turning point to avoid that. You just need awareness and one small choice at a time. Just one moment where you pause and ask, which version of me will thank me for this? One anti-comfort decision a day. That's it. Because when you stop choosing comfort by default, your life starts to feel intentional again. And that's how you avoid regret better than 99% of people. Not by being fearless, not by having it all figured out, but by refusing to abandon yourself in the moments that matter. Now, if you've been watching this and you have realized, wow, I have been living on autopilot a lot more than I thought, that's exactly why I created The Reset, my free 5-day challenge. It's not about hustle, it's not about productivity, and it's definitely not about willpower. It's a short, structured reset designed to interrupt the default patterns that keep you choosing comfort when you actually want growth. So if you're ready to stop rehearsing change and start practicing it, I will link it below. No pressure. It is there when you are. And if this video resonated, the next one that I would recommend watching is called The Hidden Script Running Your Life and How to Rewrite It. Because comfort choices don't come out of nowhere. They're usually part of a script that you didn't consciously choose. So that video will help you to see where those patterns came from and how to change them at the source. I will link it on the next screen. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I will see you in the next one. Hang on. Why does it say tracking cancel? Oh my goodness. What does that mean? Like it's still focusing on me? I don't know. What? There's always something. Okay, I'm hoping that that is fine. Or maybe it's just giving me the option of tracking cancel. Oh my goodness. Okay, camera stuff. Anyway,